The desert stretched endlessly under the pale morning light, its silence broken only by the distant call of a road runner. Miguel Yassi moved through the scrub brush with the quiet precision his grandfather had taught him. Every step deliberate, every sense alert. At 28, he carried the weight of tradition in his weathered hands and the responsibility of protecting his people's land along the Arizona-Sonora border. The deer hide caught his eye first, a splash of tanned brown against the gray-green sage. Miguel paused, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. Something was wrong. The hide was too perfectly placed, too deliberately arranged. As he approached, his heart seized. Beneath the hide, a small form lay curled like a sleeping animal. A child, perhaps 6 or 7, with dark hair matted against her dirt-streaked face. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare and scratched from the unforgiving desert floor. Miguel knelt beside her, his calloused fingers gentle as he checked for breath. Relief flooded through him as her chest rose and fell steadily. She was alive, though clearly exhausted. Her small hands clutched a worn photograph, a woman with kind eyes standing beside a modest house with Mexican tiles. The child stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal deep brown eyes, filled with confusion and fear. She pulled back instinctively, pressing herself against the earth. «Está bien, pequeña», Miguel susurró en español, luego cambió a inglés. «You're safe. I won't hurt you». She stared at him with the wariness of someone far too young to understand the weight of survival. Miguel noticed the way she favored her left ankle, the careful way she held herself. She had been walking for days, perhaps longer. «What's your name?» he asked softly. «Elena», she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miguel glanced around the empty landscape. No signs of anyone else, no tracks leading away. Just this small girl, alone in a place that could kill grown men. «Where's your family, Elena?» Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Instead, she held up the photograph with trembling fingers. Miguel studied the image, the woman's face, the house, the small garden visible in the background. «We need to get you somewhere safe», Miguel said, extending his hand slowly. «Can you walk?» Elena tested her weight on her injured ankle and winced. Miguel could see the swelling now, the way she unconsciously protected it. Without hesitation, he gathered her small form in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. As they made their way back toward the reservation, Elena's head rested against his shoulder. Miguel felt the responsibility settling over him like a familiar blanket. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. «Sometimes the desert brings us exactly what we need to find». The morning sun climbed higher as they walked, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Behind them, the deer hide lay abandoned in the sage, already beginning to blend back into the landscape that had sheltered a frightened child through what might have been her last night. The tribal council building sat low against the horizon, its adobe walls the same color as the surrounding earth. Miguel carried Elena through the wooden doors, past walls adorned with photographs of tribal leaders and children at various ceremonies. The building smelled of sage and old wood, carrying the weight of generations of decisions made within its walls. Joseph Yazzie, Miguel's grandfather and the tribe's most respected elder, looked up from where he sat reviewing documents at a long table. At 83, his presence filled any room he entered. His gray hair hung in a traditional braid down his back, and his dark eyes missed nothing. Not the careful way Elena held herself, not the exhaustion etched in Miguel's face. "Grandfather," Miguel said quietly, settling Elena into a soft chair. "I found her in the desert. She's hurt, and she's alone." Joseph rose slowly, his movements careful but dignified. He approached Elena with the same gentle patience he'd shown when Miguel was small and frightened. The old man knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Hello, little one," he said in English, then repeated the greeting in Spanish. Elena watched him with cautious attention, her small hands still clutching the photograph. Joseph's eyes took in everything, her torn clothing, her injured ankle, the careful way she held herself. "You've traveled far," he observed, not as a question but as a simple truth. Elena nodded almost imperceptibly. "Are you hungry?" This time her nod was more definite. Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Maria," he called to a woman working in the adjacent kitchen, "could you bring some of that soup, and perhaps some water?" While they waited, Joseph examined Elena's ankle with practiced hands. He had served as the community's healer for decades before the tribal clinic was built, and his touch retained the knowledge of countless injuries. "Sprained, but not broken," he told Miguel. "She needs rest, proper food, and time." Maria Blackhorse, the council building's manager and Joseph's longtime friend, appeared with a steaming bowl and a glass of cool water. Eleanor accepted both gratefully, eating with the careful speed of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. "What do we do?" Miguel asked his grandfather quietly, speaking in their native tongue. Joseph was silent for a long moment, watching Elena eat. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience and the clarity of someone who had seen many lost souls find their way home. "She was brought to us for a reason," he said, returning to English so Elena could understand. "Sometimes the desert teaches us about ourselves by showing us what we can become when we care for others." Elena looked up from her soup, studying the old man's face. "My mama said the spirits watch over children who lose their way," she said quietly, her first complete sentence since Miguel found her. Joseph smiled again. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman. What happened to her, child?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she managed to speak. "The men came. They said we had to pay money or leave. Mama hid me in the shed and told me to run if something bad happened. I heard shouting and then silence." The room grew heavy with understanding. Joseph and Miguel exchanged glances, both recognizing the all-too-familiar story of families torn apart by violence along the border. "How long did you walk?" Joseph asked gently. 3 days, maybe 4. I drank from a stream and ate berries when I could find them. At night I covered myself with the deer hide I found. It kept me warm." Joseph's expression grew thoughtful. "That deer hide, where exactly did you find it?" "Near some old stone circles, by a big rock that looked like a sleeping bear." Miguel felt his breath catch. He knew the place, an ancient Apache camping ground, used by his people for generations before the borders were drawn. His great-great-grandfather had spoken of leaving offerings there for travelers in need. Joseph met Miguel's eyes and nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. Not spirits in any supernatural sense, but the enduring power of human compassion reaching across time. "You're safe now, Elena," Joseph said firmly. "We'll help you find your family, and until we do, you have a home here." Elena set down her empty bowl and looked around the room, at the photographs on the walls, at Miguel's kind face, at Joseph's gentle presence. For the first time in days, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "The Spirit sent her," Joseph said quietly to Miguel, using the language he knew Elena wouldn't understand. "Not from another world, but from the same place all lost children come from. The need for connection, for family, for hope." Outside, the afternoon wind carried the scent of rain across the desert, promising relief to the parched earth and new growth in the days to come. 2 weeks had passed since Elena's arrival, and the tribal community had quietly adjusted to accommodate their unexpected guest. She stayed with Rosa Begay, the tribe's head teacher, whose own children had grown and moved away. The small adobe house filled with soft conversation in mixed languages and the careful sounds of healing. Elena's ankle had mended well, but the deeper wounds took longer to address. She startled at sudden noises and sometimes woke in the night, calling for her mother. During the day, she shadowed Miguel as he went about his work as a border liaison, helping coordinate with federal agencies and neighboring communities. On this particular morning, Miguel was preparing for a monthly meeting with Mexican officials in the border town of Sonoita. Elena sat at Rosa's kitchen table, working on a drawing with careful concentration. "Can I come with you today?" she asked without looking up from her paper. Miguel paused in his packing. "It's going to be a long drive, and the meeting might be boring." "I won't be any trouble." She held up her drawing, a detailed sketch of the stone circles where she'd found the deer hide, rendered with surprising accuracy for a 7-year-old. Miguel studied the image, recognizing features he'd missed when he'd visited the site with the tribal archaeologist the week before. Elena had noticed things, the way certain stones aligned, the small shrine-like arrangement near the largest boulder. "You remember it very clearly," he observed. "Mama always said I had good eyes for important things." Elena's voice carried less sadness now when she spoke of her mother, though the hurt remained. Rosa emerged from the bedroom where she'd been gathering school supplies. "Let her go, Miguel. She's been cooped up here too long. And besides," she lowered her voice slightly, "some of those officials might recognize her description. It could help." The drive south took them through landscape that shifted gradually from high desert to lower scrub country. Elena pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar terrain with a mixture of longing and recognition. The vast emptiness held both beauty and danger, memories of her desperate journey still fresh in her mind. "That's where the road to my pueblo turns off," she said quietly, as they passed a dirt track winding toward distant mountains. Miguel slowed the truck. "Do you want to see if the house is still there?" Elena considered this for a long moment. "Not yet, but maybe after the meeting." The border station at Lukeville buzzed with its usual mixture of commerce and caution. Captain Ramirez of the Sonoran State Police greeted Miguel with familiar warmth. A compact man in his 50s, he'd worked this border for 20 years and understood the delicate balance required to maintain both security and humanity. "Miguel, good to see you. And who is this?" "Elena," Miguel said simply. "She's been staying with us for a few weeks." Captain Ramirez knelt to Elena's level, his expression gentle. "Hola, Elena. You look like a girl who notices things." Elena nodded solemnly. "Miguel says you help find people who get lost." "Sometimes. Are you looking for someone?" Elena glanced at Miguel, who nodded encouragingly. "My mama. Some bad men came to our house. She told me to run." Captain Ramirez's expression grew serious. "What's your mama's name?" "Carmen Morales. We lived in San Carlos near the big church with blue doors." Recognition flickered in the captain's eyes. Miguel saw it immediately. "Captain," he prompted. Ramirez stood slowly, his face carefully neutral. "Let's talk privately for a moment." They moved away from Elena, who remained absorbed in sketching the building around her. Miguel felt his stomach tighten as he watched the captain's expression. "There was an incident in San Carlos 3 weeks ago," Ramirez said quietly. "A family was targeted by drug runners who thought they were informants. The woman, Carmen Morales, was taken to a hospital in Hermosillo. She's alive, Miguel, but she's been asking about her daughter ever since she was conscious enough to speak." Miguel felt relief and anxiety war in his chest. "Is she well enough for visitors?" "The doctors think so. She's been desperate to know what happened to Elena." Ramirez paused. "There's something else. We've arrested 3 of the men involved. Carmen's testimony could help ensure they stay in prison." Miguel looked back at Elena, who was now showing her drawing to a curious border agent. In 2 weeks, she'd begun to heal, to trust, to smile occasionally. The thought of uprooting her again filled him with protective concern. "What do you think is best?" he asked. Ramirez followed his gaze to Elena. "I think," he said carefully, "that little girl has been without her mother long enough. And I think her mother has suffered enough not knowing if her daughter survived." As they drove north that evening, Elena sat quietly in the passenger seat, processing the news that her mother was alive and recovering. The reunion would happen tomorrow. Rosa and Miguel would drive her to Hermosillo to see Carmen. "Are you scared?" Miguel asked, as they watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red. "A little," Elena admitted. "What if she's too hurt? What if she doesn't want me anymore?" Miguel pulled the truck to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Elena, there's something you need to understand about mothers. They carry their children in their hearts no matter what happens. Your mama has been looking for you every day since you were separated." Elena nodded, tears beginning to flow. "Will you come with me tomorrow?" "If you want me to." "I do." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Miguel, after I see Mama, can we still visit sometimes? I want to show her the stone circles and introduce her to Joseph." Miguel smiled, feeling something settle in his chest that he hadn't realized was unsettled. "I'd like that very much." As they resumed their journey home, Elena pressed her palm against the window, watching the desert slip past. Tomorrow would bring a reunion she'd dreamed of and feared in equal measure. But tonight, she was surrounded by people who had chosen to care for her when she needed it most. In the growing darkness, the lights of the reservation appeared ahead of them, a constellation of home in the vast landscape of possibility. The hospital in Hermosillo hummed with quiet activity as Miguel and Elena walked down the long corridor toward room 314. Elena's small hand gripped Miguel's tightly, her other hand clutching a drawing she'd made of the stone circles, a gift for her mother. Carmen Morales sat propped up in bed, her left arm in a sling and healing bruises visible on her face. But her eyes, the same deep brown as Elena's, were alert and filled with desperate hope as the door opened. "Elena?" The word escaped Carmen's lips as barely a whisper. Elena froze in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. 3 weeks apart was a lifetime when you were 7 years old. Miguel felt her hesitation and gently squeezed her hand. Mija, Carmen said, her voice breaking. My little star, come here. Elena released Miguel's hand and walked slowly toward the bed. Carmen struggled to sit up straighter, her good arm extending toward her daughter. When Elena was close enough, Carmen gathered her carefully, mindful of her injuries, but unable to resist holding her child. Miguel stepped back, giving them space for a reunion he'd imagined, but couldn't have prepared for emotionally. Both mother and daughter wept, Elena with relief and confusion, Carmen with gratitude and overwhelming love. I thought, I was so afraid. Carmen couldn't finish the sentence. The bad men came, Elena said into her mother's shoulder. You told me to run, and I did. I ran for 3 days. Carmen pulled back to look at her daughter's face, her hands gentle as she examined Elena for injuries. You're so brave, Mija. So much braver than your mama. Miguel found me, Elena said, turning to include him in the conversation. And Joseph said the desert brought me to people who would take care of me. Carmen's eyes met Miguel's over Elena's head, and he saw in them a depth of gratitude that transcended language. She struggled to find words adequate to the moment. I don't know how to thank you, she managed finally. Miguel approached the bed slowly. Elena took care of herself. We just provided a safe place for her to heal. Over the next hour, Elena shared her experiences. The kindness of Rosa, the wisdom of Joseph, the feeling of belonging she'd discovered among the Apache community. Carmen listened with wonder and growing admiration for the people who had sheltered her daughter. There's something I need to tell you both, Carmen said eventually. The doctors say I'll need several more weeks of recovery, and my job. She paused, looking uncertain. The people who hurt me, they made it clear we can't go back to San Carlos. Elena's face fell. Where will we live? Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Mija. I don't know. Miguel had been considering this possibility during the drive to Hermosillo. He discussed it with Joseph and Rosa, and with the tribal council. The answer, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. There's a teacher's position opening at our school, Miguel said quietly. Rosa is getting ready to retire, and we need someone who understands both cultures, someone who can help children who find themselves between worlds. Carmen stared at him. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you and Elena a home, if you want one. The pay isn't much, but there's a small house that comes with the position. Elena already knows everyone, and she's been helping Rosa with the younger children. Elena looked between her mother and Miguel, hope blooming in her expression. Mama, could we? I want to show you the stone circles, and Joseph wants to meet you. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected possibility. Why? She asked Miguel finally. Why would you do this for strangers? Miguel thought of his grandfather's words, of the long history of his people helping travelers in need, of the way Elena had fit seamlessly into their community despite coming from a different culture. Because Elena isn't a stranger anymore, he said simply. She's family, and family takes care of family. 2 months later, Elena stood at the edge of the stone circles as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert floor. Carmen was beside her, stronger now and healing well from her injuries. They'd come here together to leave flowers and tobacco, as Joseph had taught them, not as a supernatural ritual, but as a way of acknowledging the forces of human kindness that had brought them through their darkest time. Miguel watched from a respectful distance as mother and daughter spoke quietly together. their voices carrying gratitude and hope across the ancient camping ground. The wind stirred the desert grass, creating whispers that seemed to echo the countless stories of survival this land had witnessed. "You know," Joseph said, appearing beside Miguel with his characteristic, silent approach, "your great-great-grandfather would have been proud to see this place bringing people together again." Miguel nodded, thinking of the story Joseph had told him about the deer hide, how his ancestor had left it there years ago as an offering for any traveler who might need shelter. The hide had waited decades to serve its purpose, protecting a frightened child until help could find her. Elena ran over to them, her face bright with excitement. "Miguel, Mama says we can have a celebration feast next week for my birthday, and she wants to learn how to make fry bread from Rosa." Miguel laughed, scooping her up in his arms. "I think Rosa would like that very much." As they walked back toward the trucks, Elena between her mother and Miguel, Joseph lagged behind for a moment. He touched the largest stone gently, feeling the warmth it had absorbed from the sun. The desert stretched endlessly around them, no longer threatening but protective. A reminder that even in the harshest places, life found ways to flourish. "Thank you, old ones," he whispered in Apache, acknowledging the generations of his people who had understood that survival meant caring for others, that strength came from opening your heart to strangers, that sometimes the desert's greatest gift was not water or shelter, but the opportunity to discover who you truly were through acts of love. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of green things growing in unexpected places. In the distance, a roadrunner called once, then was quiet. Elena's laughter echoed across the desert as Miguel pretended to drop her, catching her safely at the last moment. Carmen walked beside them, her healing hand resting on Miguel's shoulder, her other arm around the small girl who had led them all home, to a place none of them had known they were seeking. The setting sun painted their shadows long across the earth, 3 figures moving together toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Behind them, the stone circles stood silent in the growing dusk, ready to shelter the next lost soul who might need to discover that sometimes the most powerful magic in the world was simply other people choosing to care.